Thank you. I sit on this platform with a degree of humility as a representative of the EU, but also as a Brit. I come a little bit sensitive about I shouldn't be preaching to India on how to manage India. But a number of people have, in the course of the morning sessions and also this afternoon, highlighted water as a very major issue. And I've looked at my briefing, and clearly you have a huge problem already in India with water. And that problem is due to get worse. People talked about groundwater levels going down, increasing demand for water for irrigation. But obviously, water quality as well as water quantity are two critical issues. You have, like many other parts of the world, unfortunately, polluted many of the rivers that you should be relying on for that water supply. Looking at this from an international point of view, as I say, you're not alone. The UN later this month will be giving the final approval to a set of sustainable development goals which are rolling forward and expanding on the previous Millennium Development Goals. And water is one of the key 17 topics. And that is about water quality, water quantity, availability and accessibility of water. Water that we need for human consumption, sanitation, water we need for food, this very critical issue of water, food nexus, problems of desertification, water we use for industry. I'm sure there's hardly an industry in this room that is not using water in some way or another in their production processes, some more centrally than others. So what is it that the EU has to say to you about water? I think we have some legitimacy for talking to you because we've gone through similar processes. We were created 50 years ago, Treaty of Rome, and very quickly when we started looking at priorities, environment was identified, and in those priorities, water management was high on the list. So we have now, in the EU, 4 decades of water management. And very quickly it was realized that when we were looking at the challenges of a river like the River Rhine, which runs through 7 or 8 countries, you could not get the Rhine cleaned up if all of the countries didn't cooperate, and if there were not some common rules, some common standards to apply. So although in the EU there's a big debate about what should be done by the EU, what should be done by the member states, the local authorities and regions, in a number of areas, and the environment is one of them, it's realized that we do need some common rules. So it's something of an irony that we have 28 member states in the EU and you have 28 states in India. And as I've talked with some of the people from the federal authorities here, their difficulties of relationships with the individual states in India are not totally dissimilar to our difficulties with many of our member states. But nevertheless, our member states have recognized they need these common rules. And it started with rules on municipal wastewater treatment, water for bathing, water for a whole range of issues. And this has evolved, and 15 years ago we passed a framework piece of legislation called the Water Framework Directive, and this requires us to take a river basin approach, looking at the whole range of river management issues, the pressures on the water in those rivers, the different demands, industrial, domestic, agriculture, the quality issues, how we balance these out. And each of our member states are obliged to come up with river basin management plans. Now, we do enforce, but there is our backlogs. I'm not going to tell you we've got it all right, but I can say that in the 15 countries who were members already in 2004, we've made very substantial progress in cleaning up our rivers. The percentage of rivers that are now clean is very high. In the more recent countries to join the EU, many of which were Warsaw Pact countries or parts of the previous USSR, there are delays and they're playing catch up. And we've recognized their needs, and the EU is giving funding in many of these countries for major investments in water treatment. Quite clearly, one of the fundamental principles in the EU which underlines how we go about formulating our environmental legislation is the concept of the polluter pays. We certainly in Europe had a situation before where the polluter was not paying. Factories could put their effluent into rivers, and it became somebody else's problem downstream if they wanted to use that water again, and it had to be cleaned. I was brought up in London, and I remember when I was a very young boy in school, my geography teacher saying, did I know that the water in the Thames was drunk 7 times between its starting point somewhere up in the Cotswolds and the time it left the Thames estuary? This was where we had to clean, had to invest heavily. Demand on water was very great. Somebody, I think this afternoon, said that you'll end up here drinking your own sewerage. That's okay if you've treated it well enough, but at the moment you've still got a long way to go to improve the quality of treatment. So we do, in the EU, have a good story to tell. We have made mistakes and we'll be open about them. There have been far more delays than we would have liked. This is an experience we can exchange with you. There is a very strong jobs message there as well. On our reckoning, there are some 70,000 businesses involved in water management in the EU, and this represents of the order of 500,000 jobs. This is truly opportunity. One of the presentations this morning talked about the need for more R&D, and certainly our challenging legislation, which has been picking up on WHO standards in terms of recommendations of water quality, has meant that industries have had to look forward and find the technology to achieve those targets. It's giving us globally a first mover advantage. Our businesses, our technology is there to be bought and sold. We are looking in India to partnership with you. The new government has come up with the Clean Ganga program, and we are going to put next year in place a program for some technical exchanges between the administrations of your federal authorities and your state authorities and our member states, whereby you can learn from not just people like me, but people who are doing the work on the ground, look at the problems they faced, look at the solutions they've come up with, and learn from that. We're also hoping to find ways in which our businesses can create partnerships with your businesses to provide the kind of technologies you need. There's a lot to be done. The EU is here and open. I think one of the messages which has been very clear from our experience is the necessity of cross-border cooperation. Very, very few rivers in the UK, and very, very few, even less rivers in the EU are within one country. In the EU, I've mentioned the Rhine, but many other rivers cross boundaries, and we do need to cooperate. And we, in addition to what we're doing in the EU, we're trying to promote cross-border cooperation more broadly in our neighbouring countries, in other countries where we're providing development and other assistance. And this is an issue which I think you in India will have to come to, in not only cooperation between the individual states within India, but also cooperation with your neighbouring countries as well. Thank you very much.